February 12, 1945, somewhere over the Ruhr Valley, Germany. Father, they said today the Germans captured one of our P-38s, and even they couldn't believe what it could do. I'm writing this by lamplight in a hangar that smells like diesel and burnt coffee. My hand's still black from checking the engine cowlings after today's mission. The rain's drumming on the tin roof above me, and I can hear the fellas playing cards in the corner, their voices low and tired. But I can't sleep yet, Dad. I need to tell you this while it's still fresh in my mind, while I can still feel the vibration of the engines in my chest and the way the stick fought back in my hands when we dove through the flak. They're saying that Luftwaffe test pilots flew one of our Lightnings, one that went down near Stuttgart last month, mostly intact, and their report came back through intelligence channels yesterday. The radio operator read it aloud in the briefing room this morning, and you could have heard a pin drop. Astonishingly fast, they wrote. Terrifying armament concentration. One of their aces, a major somebody or other, whose name I can't pronounce, said it was the most formidable fighter he'd ever flown. Can you imagine that, Dad? The same Germans who've been shooting us out of the sky for 3 years, admitting that what we built back home in American workshops and factories is something they can't match. I thought about you when I heard that. I thought about the workshop back in Spokane, about the smell of hot metal and motor oil, about your hands covered in grease as you taught me to true a crankshaft or gap a spark plug. I thought about that old wrench you gave me before I shipped out, the one with your initials scratched into the handle and the words, "For luck, not repair," stamped underneath. It's in my jacket pocket right now, Dad. It rides with me on every mission. And today, when we were at 22,000 feet with the flak bursting all around us like black flowers blooming in the frozen sky, I swear I felt it vibrate against my ribs, like it remembered where it came from. I wasn't supposed to be a fighter pilot, you know that. I was a mechanic, a grease monkey who could strip an engine blindfolded and put it back together before morning. But they needed pilots more than they needed wrenches, and somewhere along the way I went from fixing machines to flying them. And Dad, I have to tell you, there's nothing in the world like a P-38. Nothing. The first time I climbed into that cockpit and felt those twin Allison engines roar to life beneath me, it was like riding thunder itself. The whole aircraft shakes when you push the throttles forward, and the sound, God, the sound is like the voice of something ancient and powerful, something that shouldn't exist but does, because men like you figured out how to cage lightning inside cylinders and pistons. If this story moves you, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment if you had a family member or friend who lived through the Second World War. Every story shared helps keep their memory alive. My name is Samuel H., though the fellas in my squadron call me Sammy. I'm 25 years old, a staff sergeant in the United States Army Air Forces, 8th Air Force, 479th Fighter Group, 435th Squadron. I fly a P-38J Lightning that I've named Lightning Lady, and she's painted on the nose cowling in white letters that I traced myself with a brush dipped in borrowed paint. Before all this, before the war, before the uniforms and the missions and the nights when I can't sleep because I keep seeing tracer fire in my dreams, I was a mechanic at a small airfield outside Spokane, Washington. I spent my weekdays tuning up crop dusters and rich men's Stearman biplanes, and my weekends in your workshop, Dad, restoring old cars that other people had given up on. I can still see it all so clearly, even now, even here in this cold hangar 6,000 miles from home. I close my eyes, and I'm back there, back in that workshop on a Saturday afternoon in the summer of 1939. The sun is slanting through the dusty windows, catching the silver in your hair as you lean over the engine block of that old Ford Model A we were rebuilding. You're humming Blue Skies under your breath, the way you always did when you were concentrating, and the sound of your wrench clanging against the toolbox is like a church bell ringing out the hours. I can smell the motor oil, thick and sweet and familiar, mixing with the scent of fresh-cut grass drifting in from Mrs. Patterson's yard next door. I can feel the rough wooden handle of your wrench in my hand, the weight of it solid and real, and the way my fingernails were always black with grease no matter how hard I scrubbed them. You taught me that machines have souls, Dad. You never said it in so many words, but I learned it anyway, watching the way you touched an engine with something close to reverence, the way you listened to the sound it made and just knew what was wrong and how to fix it. An engine will tell you everything you need to know, you used to say, if you're willing to listen. And I listened. God knows I listened. I learned to hear the difference between a healthy engine and a sick one, to feel the vibration in my bones and know whether a bearing was about to fail or a valve was sticking. I learned that every machine is a conversation between the man who built it and the man who flies it, and that if you respect that conversation, if you honor it, the machine will take care of you. That's why I enlisted, Dad. When the news came through about Pearl Harbor, when the whole country seemed to catch fire with anger and grief and determination, I knew I couldn't sit still. If engines were built to roar, I wasn't born to sit and listen. I was born to make them sing. The day I shipped out, you walked me to the bus station. You didn't say much. You never were much for speeches. But when we shook hands, you pressed that wrench into my palm and closed my fingers around it. Keep this with you, you said. Not for fixing things, for remembering where you came from. And I have, Dad. I've kept it with me every single day since then, through basic training and flight school, through the gray Atlantic crossing on a troop ship that rolled and pitched until half the boys were green with seasickness, through my first mission over France when I thought my heart would pound right out of my chest, through every dogfight and every bombing run and every moment when I thought I wouldn't see another sunrise. When I first arrived at the base in England, a place called Wattisham, though we've moved twice since then, I was assigned to the ground crew. They needed mechanics, and that's what I was. I spent my days elbow-deep in engine cowlings, checking fuel lines and hydraulic systems, replacing worn-out spark plugs and patching bullet holes in aluminum skin. I was good at it, Dad. You'd have been proud. The pilots used to come by and watch me work, and they'd joke that I could diagnose an engine problem just by the sound the propeller made when it spun up. Sammy's got magic ears, they'd say, and I'd laugh and tell them it wasn't magic. It was just listening. But then we started losing pilots faster than we could replace them. The Luftwaffe was fierce in those early days, and our boys were flying into hell every time they crossed the channel. The life expectancy of a fighter pilot was measured in missions, not months, and the command started pulling mechanics who had any flight experience and putting them through accelerated training. I'd logged maybe 200 hours in civilian aircraft before the war, barnstorming and giving flying lessons to kids with more money than sense. So they tapped me on the shoulder one morning and told me to report to flight school. 6 weeks later, I was in the cockpit of a P-38 Lightning for the first time. And Dad, I swear to you, it was like meeting God and the devil at the same time. The Lightning isn't like other fighters. It's bigger, heavier, more complex. It's got 2 engines instead of 1, 2 propellers spinning in opposite directions to cancel out the torque, a tricycle landing gear that makes it sit level on the runway instead of tail down like a Mustang or a Thunderbolt. The cockpit sits in a central nacelle between the twin booms, surrounded by glass. And when you're up there at altitude with nothing but sky above and below, you feel like you're flying inside a bubble, suspended in space with nothing holding you up but physics and faith. The first time I pushed those throttles forward and felt the engines come alive, I understood what you meant about machines having souls. The Lightning doesn't just fly, it prowls. It hunts. The engines growl and snarl, and the whole airframe shivers with barely contained power, and when you bank into a turn and feel the G-forces pressing you down into your seat, it's like the aircraft is an extension of your own body, responding to your thoughts before your hands even move. It's terrifying and exhilarating and addictive, all at once. My flight instructor was a captain named Mitchell T., a Texas boy with a drawl as thick as molasses and a scar running from his eyebrow to his jawline, a souvenir from a close encounter with a foca wolf over the North Sea. He didn't have much patience for mistakes, but he was fair, and he knew his business. On my 3rd training flight, after I'd bounced the landing twice and nearly ground-looped on the rollout, he leaned over and said, "Sammy, you fly like a mechanic. You're thinking too much. Stop trying to understand the machine and just feel it. Let it talk to you. And that's when it clicked, Dad. That's when I remembered what you taught me. I stopped thinking and started listening, and the lightning and we came to an understanding. When I graduated from flight school and got my wings, they assigned me to the 479th Fighter Group, 435th Squadron, and sent us to England to join the air war over Europe. That was in the autumn of 1944, when the Allies were pushing hard into Germany, and the skies over the Reich were thick with flak and fighters and the smoke of burning cities. My first combat mission was an escort run for a formation of B-17 flying fortresses hitting an aircraft factory near Frankfurt. We took off before dawn, the runway lights glowing like a string of pearls in the darkness, and climbed to 25,000 feet, where the air is so thin and cold that your breath freezes on the inside of your oxygen mask, and your fingers go numb even inside your gloves. I was terrified, Dad. I won't lie to you. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the stick, and my heart was hammering so loud I thought the other pilots could hear it over the radio. But then the sun came up, and the sky turned gold and pink and purple, and I looked out at the formation of lightnings around me, 32 aircraft flying in perfect formation, their twin tails gleaming in the early light. And I felt something shift inside me. This was what I'd been trained for. This was what all those hours in the workshop, all those lessons about listening to engines and respecting machines, had been preparing me for. I wasn't just a mechanic anymore. I was a warrior. And the lightning I was flying wasn't just a machine. It was my partner, my protector, my weapon, and my wings. The mission was supposed to be routine. Escort the bombers to the target, keep the Luftwaffe off their backs, bring everyone home. Simple, clean. But nothing in war is ever simple, and nothing is ever clean. We were about an hour into the flight, cruising at 23,000 feet over the patchwork fields of France, when the first Messerschmitts appeared. They came out of the sun, a dozen of them at least, diving down on the bomber formation with their guns blazing. The radio exploded with voices, "Bandits! Bandits! 2 o'clock high!" And suddenly, the sky was full of tracer fire and black smoke, and the screaming howl of engines pushed past their red lines. I broke formation and dove after a Messerschmitt that was lining up on one of the B-17s, my thumb already pressing the trigger on the control yoke. The Lightning has 4 .50 caliber machine guns and 1 20mm cannon, all mounted in the nose, all firing forward along the same axis. When you pull the trigger, it's like unleashing a river of destruction. The whole aircraft shudders with the recoil, and the air in front of you turns white with smoke and flame. I walked my fire into the Messerschmitt's left wing and saw pieces of metal tear away, tumbling back in the slipstream. The German pilot rolled inverted and dove away, trailing smoke, and I pulled up hard to avoid overshooting him. That's when I heard the sound that still wakes me up at night, Dad. A sound like tearing canvas, but 1,000 times louder. Flak. Anti-aircraft fire. The Germans had big 80mm guns scattered all over France and Germany, and when they fired, the shells burst at your altitude and sent white-hot fragments of shrapnel tearing through the air. I'd been briefed on flak. I'd seen the films, but nothing prepares you for the real thing. The sky around me erupted in black puffs of smoke, each one marking the spot where a shell had detonated, and the concussions shook my aircraft like a giant hand slapping it sideways. I jinked left, then right, throwing the Lightning into a series of violent S-turns to throw off the gunner's aim. The smell of cordite seeped into the cockpit, acrid and choking, mixing with the stink of hot oil and my own sweat. My hands were frozen on the stick, my fingers cramped from gripping it so hard, and I could hear my own breath rasping in the oxygen mask. Too fast, too shallow. I was hyperventilating. I was on the edge of panic. And then I remembered your voice, Dad, calm and steady. When a machine starts acting up, don't fight it. Work with it. Listen to what it's telling you. I forced myself to breathe slower. I loosened my grip on the stick. I listened to the sound of the engines, steady and strong, and I felt the vibration of the airframe, solid and true. The lightning was fine. The lightning was doing exactly what it was built to do. It was me who needed to get my head straight. I leveled out and looked around for my squadron. They were scattered across the sky, tangling with German fighters, their contrails weaving white threads against the blue. And that's when I saw Eddie M., my wingman, a kid from Ohio who was only 20 years old and who'd shown me pictures of his girl back home, a pretty blonde named Mary who sent him letters every week. Eddie's Lightning was trailing smoke from the right engine, the propeller windmilling uselessly, and he was losing altitude fast. I pulled up alongside him and keyed my radio. "Eddie, you okay?" His voice came back, tight with fear. "Lost the starboard engine. Oil pressure's dropping on the port." "I don't think I'm going to make it back, Sammy." "Yes, you are," I said, though I didn't believe it myself. "Stay with me. We'll get you home." But we didn't get him home, Dad. We were over enemy territory, still 100 miles from the channel, and Eddie's remaining engine quit 10 minutes later. I watched him bail out, watched the canopy blow away and his body tumble free, watched the white parachute blossom against the gray clouds below. I circled overhead until I saw German soldiers running toward him across a field, and then I turned for home because there was nothing else I could do. I landed back at base 3 hours later, my fuel tanks nearly empty, my body shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline crash. The ground crew swarmed over the Lightning checking for damage, and the crew chief whistled when he saw the holes in the left boom where shrapnel had punched through the aluminum skin, missing the fuel tank by inches. "You're a lucky man, Sammy," he said. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt hollow. I felt like something had been scraped out of my chest and replaced with cold air. Eddie M. was gone, probably in a German POW camp by now if he was lucky, dead if he wasn't. And all I could think was, I thought it would be over quickly. I was wrong. That night I sat in my bunk and took your wrench out of my jacket pocket, Dad. I held it in both hands and felt the weight of it, solid and real and familiar. I thought about the workshop back home, about the smell of motor oil and the sound of your voice, and I wondered if the boy who'd left Spokane was ever coming back, or if he'd died somewhere over France and left behind someone else, someone harder and colder and older than his years. 3 days after Eddie went down, I got a package from home. It was waiting for me on my bunk when I came back from a morning patrol, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string, my name and unit written in your careful block letters on the front. I sat down on the edge of the bunk and opened it slowly, savoring the moment, because mail from home is worth more than gold out here, Dad. It's a lifeline, a reminder that there's a world beyond the war, beyond the flak and the fighters and the endless gray skies. Inside was a letter from you, 4 pages written on the back of old invoices from the workshop, and a smaller letter from Mom, her handwriting neat and precise, every line perfectly straight. There was also a photograph, black and white and slightly creased, showing the 2 of you standing in front of the workshop. You were wearing your old work coveralls, Mom was in her Sunday dress, and both of you were smiling. I stared at that photograph for a long time, trying to remember what it felt like to be the person who'd stood behind the camera and snapped that picture. The person who'd believed the war would be an adventure, and that he'd come home a hero. Your letter was full of news from Spokane. You wrote about how the workshop was busier than ever, with everyone bringing in their cars for repairs because new parts were rationed and people had to make do with what they had. You wrote about how Mrs. Patterson's son had been wounded in Italy but was recovering in a hospital in North Africa. You wrote about how Mom had started a victory garden in the backyard and was growing tomatoes and carrots and beans, and how she'd canned enough vegetables to last through the winter. You wrote about everything except the war, except what I was doing, except the fact that your son was flying into hell every other day and might not come back. But at the end of the letter you wrote something that made me stop and read it 3 times over. You wrote, "Sammy, I don't know what you're facing over there and I won't pretend to understand. But I know this. You were raised to respect machines, to understand that they're built with purpose and care, and that the men who fly them carry that purpose with them. Whatever you're doing, whatever you're asked to do, remember that you're not just flying an aircraft. You're carrying the hopes of everyone who built it, everyone who believes in what it represents. And we're proud of you, son, more than words can say. I folded that letter and put it in my jacket pocket, right next to your wrench, and I felt something shift inside me again. The hollowness was still there, the cold, empty space where something had been scraped away, but now there was something else too, a sense of purpose, a sense of connection. I wasn't alone up there in the sky. I was carrying you with me, Dad. I was carrying Mom in Spokane and the workshop and everything I'd learned about machines and respect and the conversation between builder and flyer. That afternoon, I went out to the flight line and found Lightning Lady sitting on her hard stand, her twin engines silent, her propellers still. I climbed up onto the wing and opened the cowling on the left engine, just to check the spark plugs, just to give my hands something to do. The crew chief came over and watched me work for a minute, then shook his head and smiled. "You know we've got a whole crew to do that, right?" "I know," I said, "but I need to do it myself. I need to know she's ready." He nodded, understanding without words, and left me alone. I spent an hour going over that engine, checking every connection, every hose, every fastener, making sure everything was perfect. And when I was done, I rested my hand on the engine cowling, still warm from the afternoon sun, and I whispered, "Take care of me up there, girl, and I'll take care of you." The next day, we flew a fighter sweep over the Ruhr Valley, hunting for German aircraft and hitting targets of opportunity on the ground. It was a good mission, clean and simple, and we all came home without a scratch. But the day after that, we lost 2 more pilots. Charlie F. Ha, who'd been in my flight school class, and a quiet kid named Thomas R., who'd only been with the squadron for 3 weeks. Their Lightnings went down over the Rhine, both shot to pieces by flak, and neither of them made it out. We drank to their memory that night in the officers' club, raising our glasses of watered-down whiskey and trying not to think about the fact that we could be next. War is like that, Dad. It's not constant terror and constant action. It's long stretches of boredom punctuated by moments of sheer horror, and in between you find these little pockets of calm, these moments of grace where you can breathe and remember who you are. You find them in letters from home, in photographs, in the sound of rain on a hangar roof, in the simple act of cleaning an engine and feeling the familiar weight of a wrench in your hand. You find them in prayer, if you're the praying kind, or in silence, if you're not. You find them wherever you can, because without them, you'd go mad. I'm not the praying kind, Dad. You know that. I've never been much for church or scripture or any of that. But I've found myself talking to you in my head more and more, especially on the long flights when there's nothing to do but hold formation and watch the sky and think about everything and nothing. I tell you about the missions, about the fellas in my squadron, about the way the sun looks when it rises over the English Channel and turns the clouds into rivers of gold. I tell you about the things I've seen and the things I've done, and I imagine you listening, nodding, understanding without judgment. It's not prayer exactly, but it's close. It's a conversation, the kind you taught me to have with machines, extended now to the distance between us. And I need that conversation, Dad. I need to believe that you're listening, that these words I'm writing will reach you, that when this is all over, if I survive, if I make it home, we'll sit down in the workshop and I'll tell you everything, and you'll understand. February 9th, 1945. That's a date I'll remember for the rest of my life. We were briefed at 0400 hours for a maximum effort mission. The target was a synthetic oil refinery near Gelsenkirchen, deep in the Ruhr Valley, Germany's industrial heartland. Intelligence said the Germans had concentrated their flak batteries around the refineries because they were running low on fuel and couldn't afford to lose production. They also said the Luftwaffe would put up everything they had to defend the target. In other words, it was going to be a bloodbath. 48 P-38, Lightnings from the 479th Fighter Group took off from our base at Wattisham just before sunrise, climbing through broken clouds into a sky that was the color of steel. We formed up over the channel, 4 squadrons in a loose trail formation, and turned east toward Germany. The B-17s we were escorting were already airborne, a massive formation of 72 fortresses that looked like a swarm of silver insects in the distance, their contrails marking white lines across the blue. I was flying as element lead in the 435th Squadron, with a new kid named Johnny S. as my wingman. Johnny was 19 years old, fresh out of flight school, and this was his first combat mission. He was nervous. I could hear it in his voice over the radio, the way his words came out too fast, too high-pitched. I keyed my mic and said, "Johnny, stay close to me. Do what I do. We'll get through this." "Roger that, Sammy," he said, and I could hear him trying to sound confident, trying to be brave. We crossed into Germany at 0730 hours, and the sky ahead of us was already dark with smoke from earlier raids. The countryside below looked like a quilt, green fields and brown forests and grey towns, stitched together with roads and rivers, all of it peaceful and ordinary until you remembered that every inch of it was enemy territory, that every town had anti-aircraft guns, that every field might hide a camouflaged airstrip. The first flak started at 0745, when we were still 20 miles from the target. It came up in clusters, black puffs of smoke that appeared out of nowhere and hung in the air like angry clouds. The bomber formation didn't even flinch. They just kept flying straight and level, holding their course, because that's what you do when you're on a bomb run. You fly into the teeth of the flak, and you don't break formation, no matter how scared you are, no matter how much you want to dive away and run for home. We Lightnings had more freedom. Our job was to keep the German fighters off the bombers, which meant we could maneuver, we could jink and dodge, we could use speed and altitude to our advantage. I pushed the throttles forward and felt Lightning Lady surge ahead, her engines howling, her propellers clawing at the thin air. The altimeter read 22,000 feet. The temperature gauge read minus 40 degrees Celsius. My breath came out in white puffs inside the oxygen mask, and I could feel the cold seeping through my flight suit, through my leather jacket, into my bones. "Bandits! Bandits! 12 o'clock level!" The call came over the radio, urgent and sharp, and I snapped my head forward and saw them, a formation of German fighters, maybe 20 of them, Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s, coming straight at us head-on. They were attacking the bombers from the front, the most dangerous angle, where the B-17's defensive guns were weakest. 435th Squadron, engage, our flight leader called, and we dove. The next 10 minutes were pure chaos, Dad. I can't describe it in any way that makes sense, because nothing about combat makes sense. It's all speed and violence and fear compressed into a space so small and so intense that time seems to stop and stretch and fold back on itself. I remember rolling inverted and pulling the stick back into my lap, diving down on a Focke-Wulf that was lining up on one of the B-17s. I remember pressing the trigger and feeling the lightning shudder as the guns fired, the 450s and the single 20mm cannon all hammering at once, the nose of the aircraft disappearing in a cloud of white smoke. I remember seeing my tracers converge on the Focke-Wulf's fuselage, seeing pieces fly off, seeing the German pilot's canopy shatter and the aircraft snap into a violent spin. I pulled out of the dive and climbed back up, my vision graying out from the G-forces, my body pressed down into the seat so hard I could barely breathe. The sky was full of aircraft, Lightnings and Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs all tangled together, twisting and turning, firing and dying. I saw a B-17 take a direct hit from flak, its right wing folding up and tearing away, the fuselage tumbling out of the sky like a broken toy. I saw a Lightning collide with a Messerschmitt, both aircraft disintegrating in a ball of orange flame. I saw parachutes blossoming white against the black smoke, and I didn't know if they were ours or theirs. Johnny S. was still with me, still on my wing, and I could hear him breathing over the radio, fast and ragged. "Sammy, there's too many of them," he said, his voice cracking. "There's too many—" "Stay with me, Johnny," I shouted, and then a Messerschmitt appeared in my peripheral vision, diving down from above, its guns flashing. I broke hard left, throwing the Lightning into a maximum performance turn, and the Messerschmitt overshot me, its pilot pulling up and away. I reversed the turn and got on his tail, closing the distance, my thumb hovering over the trigger. But before I could fire, another Lightning, I don't know whose, came screaming down from above and hosed the Messerschmitt with machine gun fire. The German fighter exploded, pieces of it tumbling past my canopy, and I had to jink hard to avoid the debris. "Good shooting," I called on the radio, but there was no answer. Whoever had made that shot was already gone, chasing another target, caught up in the insanity of the dogfight. I pulled up to rejoin the bomber formation and saw that we'd lost at least 6 B-17s, their places in the formation marked by empty sky and slowly descending parachutes. But the rest of them were still flying, still holding their course, and I felt a surge of admiration for those bomber crews, for the sheer courage it took to keep flying straight and level while the world exploded around them, and then the flak intensified. We were over the target now. Gelsenkirchen spread out below us like a gray scar on the landscape, and the Germans had every gun in the valley firing at once. The sky turned black with smoke, and the concussions from the bursting shells shook my aircraft so hard I thought the wings would tear off. I heard metal pinging against the fuselage, felt the Lightning lurch sideways as shrapnel tore through the left boom, and for a moment I thought I was done, thought this was it, thought I'd never see Spokane again. But Lightning Lady held together. She kept flying, kept fighting, her engines still roaring, her controls still responsive. I looked down and saw the refineries below, saw the B-17's bombs falling away in long, dark strings, saw the explosions rippling across the target area, orange and red and white, like 1,000 suns being born at once. And I thought, this is what we came here to do. This is what we built these machines for. This is why I'm flying instead of fixing engines on the ground. The bomber formation turned for home, and we turned with them, forming up in a protective screen around the fortresses. The German fighters had broken off, their ammunition exhausted, and the flak was falling behind us as we left the Ruhr Valley and headed west toward the Rhine. I did a quick count on the radio and felt my stomach drop. We'd lost 9 Lightnings from the 479th Fighter Group. 9 pilots who'd been alive and joking in the briefing room 5 hours ago were now either dead or missing or prisoners. And I couldn't even remember all their names. Johnny S. was still with me, still flying formation on my right wing, and I could see his aircraft in the corner of my vision, the twin booms and the central nacelle and the double tail fins, all of it familiar and reassuring. "You did good, kid," I said over the radio. "Real good." "I thought I was gonna die," he said, his voice shaking. "I thought we were all gonna die." "We're not dead yet," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to reassure him or myself. We crossed the Rhine at 09:30 hours, and the Channel at 10:15, and the white cliffs of Dover appeared ahead of us like a promise, like a beacon guiding us home. I'd never been so happy to see England in my life. We landed at Wattisham at 10:45, the Lightnings touching down one after another, their tires squealing on the runway, their brakes smoking. I taxied to my hardstand and shut down the engines, and the sudden silence was so profound it felt like a physical presence. The ground crew swarmed over Lightning Lady, counting the holes in her skin. 17, they said. 17 shrapnel hits, 3 of them damn near fatal. The crew chief shook his head and said, "Sammy, you've got the devil's own luck." But I didn't feel lucky. I felt exhausted. I felt numb. I felt like I'd aged 10 years in 5 hours. I climbed down from the cockpit and stood on the wing for a moment, my legs shaking, my hands trembling so badly I could barely grip the handholds. And then I bent over and vomited onto the concrete, my body finally rebelling against the adrenaline and the fear and the sheer overwhelming horror of what I'd just been through. The crew chief pretended not to notice, just handed me a canteen of water and walked away to give me some privacy. That night, at the debriefing, the intelligence officer told us what had happened after we left the target area. The refineries had been destroyed, he said. Direct hits on the cracking towers and the storage tanks. The fires were still burning, visible from satellite reconnaissance, and it would be months before the Germans could get them back into production. "Gentlemen," he said, "you struck a significant blow today. You should be proud." But no one in that room felt proud, Dad. We felt relieved to be alive, and we felt grief for the men who weren't, and we felt tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. We didn't want to hear about strategic victories or industrial targets or any of that. We just wanted to stop seeing the faces of the men who died, stop hearing their voices on the radio, stop wondering if we'd be next. I went back to my bunk and took out your wrench, and I sat there for a long time just holding it, feeling the weight of it, remembering the workshop and the smell of motor oil and the sound of your voice. And I wondered what you would think if you could see me now, if you could see what I'd become, if you'd still be proud of the boy who left Spokane to fight in a war that seemed to have no end. 3 days later, on February 12th, today, the day I'm writing this letter, something happened that I need to tell you about, Dad. Something that made me understand, really understand, what we've been fighting for all this time. We were in the briefing room for the morning mission when Lieutenant Harris, our intelligence officer, came in with a folder marked Top Secret and a look on his face that said he had news worth hearing. He waited until everyone was seated, until the room had gone quiet, and then he opened the folder and pulled out a sheaf of papers covered in German typewriting. "Gentlemen," he said, "this came through intelligence channels yesterday. It's a technical evaluation report written by Luftwaffe test pilots who flew a captured P-38 Lightning, one of ours that went down near Stuttgart last month, mostly intact. The Germans repaired it, fueled it up, and had their aces take it for a spin." He paused, looking around the room, letting the tension build. "I thought you'd like to hear what they had to say about the aircraft you're flying." He started reading, translating the German as he went. The report was clinical, technical, full of numbers and specifications and aerodynamic analysis. But then he got to the conclusion, and his voice changed, became slower, more deliberate. "The P-38 Lightning," he read, "possesses flight characteristics that are astonishingly superior to our standard fighters. Its speed in level flight and dive exceeds that of the Bf-109 and FW-190 by a significant margin. Its rate of climb is exceptional. Its maneuverability, while not as tight as single-engine fighters at low altitude, is more than adequate for combat operations. But most impressive, and most concerning, is its armament concentration. The 450 caliber machine guns and single 20mm cannon, all mounted in the nose, create a cone of fire that is terrifying in its destructive power. No dispersal, no convergence issues, just pure, concentrated firepower along a single axis. We have never encountered anything like it." The room was silent. You could have heard a pin drop. And then someone in the back, I think it was Billy R., a big farm kid from Iowa, said, "They're scared of us." Lieutenant Harris smiled. "Yes, Sergeant, they are." He flipped to another page. "There's more. The test pilot, a Major Hartmann, one of their top aces with over 300 kills, wrote a personal note at the end of the report. He said, and I quote, "This aircraft represents a level of engineering sophistication that we have not achieved. It is a formidable weapon in the hands of a skilled pilot. I would not want to face it in combat." The room erupted. Guys were cheering, slapping each other on the back, grinning like idiots. Even the officers were smiling, caught up in the moment. And I sat there, Dad, with your wrench in my pocket, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Pride. Not the arrogant, chest-thumping kind of pride, but the quiet, deep kind. The kind that comes from knowing that what you do matters, that what you build matters, that the work means something. After the briefing, I walked out to the flight line and stood looking at Lightning Lady, really looking at her for the first time in weeks. I saw past the oil stains and the patched bullet holes and the chipped paint. I saw what you would have seen, Dad. A machine built by men who understood engineering, who understood aerodynamics and metallurgy and propulsion, who understood that every rivet and every weld and every precisely machined part had to work together in perfect harmony, or the whole thing would fail. I saw a machine that was the product of thousands of hours of design and testing and refinement, a machine that represented the best of what American industry could produce. And I thought about you standing in the workshop in Spokane, teaching me to respect machines, teaching me to understand that they're not just collections of metal and wires and fluids, but expressions of human ingenuity and purpose. You taught me that every machine is a conversation between the man who builds it and the man who uses it, and that if both sides respect that conversation, something beautiful happens, something transcendent. The Germans understood that too, Dad. That's what their report was really saying. They looked at the lightning and they saw what we'd built, and they recognized it for what it was. Not just a weapon, but a statement that said, we can outthink you, we can outbuild you, we can take the laws of physics and bend them to our will, and there's nothing you can do to stop us. I climbed up into the cockpit and sat there for a while, my hands resting on the control yoke, feeling the smooth, worn leather under my palms. I thought about all the missions I'd flown, all the times this aircraft had brought me home when it should have failed, when the odds said I should have died. I thought about the sound of the engines, that deep-throated roar that you feel in your chest as much as hear with your ears. I thought about the way the aircraft responds to your touch, instant and precise, like it's reading your mind. And I thought about the men who designed it, the engineers at Lockheed who sat at their drafting tables and imagined something that didn't exist, and then made it real. I thought about the men who built it, the riveters and welders and machinists in factories across America, working round the clock to produce these machines by the hundreds, by the thousands. I thought about the women, too, the Rosie the Riveters who stepped into jobs that men had left behind when they went to war, who proved they could do the work just as well, maybe better. I thought about all of them, every single person who touched this aircraft during its construction, and I realized that I was carrying their hopes too, just like you said in your letter. I wasn't flying alone. I was flying with an army of people who believed in what this machine represented. That afternoon, we flew another mission, a fighter sweep over Western Germany, looking for enemy aircraft and hitting targets of opportunity. It was quieter than the mission 3 days before, less dramatic. We encountered a small formation of Messerschmitts near Cologne and shot down 3 of them without taking any losses. It was professional, efficient, almost routine. But the whole time I was up there flying at 20,000 feet with the winter sun slanting through the canopy, I kept thinking about that German report, about Major Hartmann sitting in the cockpit of a captured Lightning and realizing that he was flying something better than anything his own country could produce. I kept thinking about what that must have felt like for him, to be a highly decorated ace, a man who'd spent years mastering his craft, and to suddenly understand that the enemy had a technological edge that no amount of skill could overcome. I tried to imagine what I would feel if the situation were reversed, if I climbed into a captured German fighter and found it superior to anything we had. Would I be angry? Afraid? Ashamed? But then I realized that the question was pointless, because the situation wasn't reversed. We had the edge. We had the Lightning. And that edge was born in places like your workshop, Dad, in small towns all across America where men like you taught boys like me that machines matter, that engineering matters, that doing things right matters. The Germans had skill and courage and determination, but they didn't have what we had. A whole nation of mechanics and tinkerers and inventors, people who grew up taking things apart and putting them back together, people who understood machines in their bones. When we landed back at base that evening, I went to the officers' club and found Lieutenant Harris having a drink. I bought him a beer and asked if I could see that German report again. He pulled it out of his briefcase and handed it to me, and I sat there reading it slowly, carefully, trying to understand not just what the words said, but what they meant. There was one section that particularly struck me. The test pilot had written about the Lightning's twin-engine configuration, noting that while it made the aircraft heavier and more complex than single-engine fighters, it also provided redundancy and survivability. I suffered a simulated engine failure at altitude, he wrote, and was surprised to find that the aircraft could maintain level flight on one engine with minimal difficulty. In combat, This could mean the difference between death and survival. Our single-engine fighters offer no such margin for error. I thought about Eddie M. To my wingman, who'd gone down over France, and about how he'd lost one engine and then the other, and about how if he'd been flying a P-51 or a P-47 or any single-engine fighter, he would have been dead the moment that first engine quit. The Lightning's twin engines had given him a chance, even if that chance hadn't been enough in the end. And I thought about all the missions I'd flown, all the times I'd had engine problems or taken damage, and how many times that second engine had saved my life without me even realizing it. The Germans understood what we'd built, Dad. They understood it better than most of our own pilots did, because they'd studied it from the outside, analyzed it with cold professional detachment, tried to find its weaknesses and come up short. And that understanding, that grudging respect from a skilled enemy, meant more to me than any medal or commendation ever could. It meant that what we were doing mattered. It meant that all those hours you spent teaching me about engines and machines and the importance of doing things right, all of it mattered. It's late now, Dad, past midnight. The rain has stopped and the clouds have cleared, and through the hangar door I can see stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. The fellas have all gone to bed, and I'm alone with my thoughts and this letter, and the sound of my own breathing in the silence. I've been thinking about what I'm going to say when I come home, if I come home. I've been thinking about how I'll explain what this was like, what it meant, what it changed in me, and I'm not sure I can. How do you describe the feeling of flying a machine so powerful it seems alive, so responsive it feels like an extension of your own body? How do you explain what it's like to know that German pilots, men who've been fighting for years, men with hundreds of kills, men who are legends in their own right, look at what you're flying and feel fear? I used to think that war was about bravery and heroism, about doing the right thing and standing up for what you believe in. And maybe it is, for some people. But for me, Dad, it's become something different. It's become about the machine, about understanding it, respecting it, working with it, about the conversation you taught me to have, the one between builder and flyer, the one that says, I know what you can do, I know what you were built for, and I trust you to do it. Every time I climb into Lightning Lady's cockpit, I carry your wrench with me. Every time I start those engines and feel them rumble to life beneath me, I think about you. Every time I push the throttles forward and feel the acceleration press me back into my seat, I remember the workshop, remember the smell of motor oil and hot metal, remember your hands covered in grease as you taught me that machines have souls. And I believe it now, Dad. I believe it with every fiber of my being. This aircraft has a soul. It's the soul of every person who designed it, every person who built it, every person who maintains it and fuels it and arms it and sends it out to do what it was built to do. It's your soul, too, in a way. Because everything you taught me is in the way I fly, in the way I listen to the engines and feel the controls and understand what the machine is telling me. I used to think God was up here in the clouds, watching over us, guiding us, protecting us. Now I just see smoke and fire and the black flowers of flak bursting against the gray sky. But I've found something else up here, something I didn't expect. I've found purpose. I've found meaning. I've found a connection to something larger than myself, something that transcends the war and the killing and the fear. I've found the conversation you taught me to have, and it's kept me alive when nothing else could. The Germans captured one of our Lightnings, Dad, and they flew it, and they studied it, and they wrote a report that said it was the most formidable fighter they'd ever encountered. They said it possessed astonishing speed and terrifying firepower and engineering sophistication beyond what they'd achieved. They said they wouldn't want to face it in combat, and all I could think when I heard that was, this is what we built. This is what American workshops and factories and the hands of ordinary men and women created. This is what happens when you respect machines, when you understand them, when you build them with purpose and care. This is what happens when you teach a boy to listen to engines and to honor the conversation between builder and flyer, I don't know what the future holds, Dad. I don't know if I'll survive this war, if I'll make it home, if I'll ever stand in the workshop with you again and feel like the person I used to be. The boy who left Spokane is gone, changed by what he's seen and done and become. But the lessons you taught him are still there, still guiding him, still keeping him alive. Your wrench still rides in my pocket, vibrating every time the engines roar, like it remembers where it came from, like it's reminding me that I'm not just flying a machine. I'm flying a promise that says, we will outthink them, we will outbuild them, we will take the laws of physics and bend them to our will, and we will win, because men like you taught boys like me that machines matter, that engineering matters, that doing things right matters. If you ever wondered whether what we built back home meant anything, Dad, whether all those hours in the workshop teaching me about engines and respect and the soul of machines made a difference, it did. It meant everything. Even the enemy sees it now. I'll write again when I can. Until then, know that I'm safe, that I'm doing what I was trained to do, and that every time I fly, I carry you with me. Your son, Staff Sergeant Samuel H. 479th Fighter Group, 435th Squadron, United States Army Air Forces, February 12, 1945. The wrench hasn't left my pocket since you gave it to me. It's worn smooth now, the engraving almost faded, but I can still read it. For luck, not repair. You were right, Dad. I haven't needed it for repairs, but the luck has held, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for everything you taught me. I hope I've made you proud. Samuel survived the war. He flew 37 combat missions over Germany and France, shot down 4 enemy aircraft, and was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters. His P-38 Lightning Lady brought him home from every mission, even the ones where she shouldn't have, even the ones where the odds said he'd die. When he returned to Spokane in the autumn of 1945, his father was waiting at the train station, wearing the same work coveralls he'd worn in the workshop all those years ago. They shook hands, and Samuel felt the familiar roughness of his father's palms, the strength in his grip, the weight of everything unspoken between them. Edward H. didn't ask about the war, didn't ask about the missions or the fear or the men who hadn't come home. He just said, "Welcome back, son. The workshop's waiting for you." Samuel went to work the next day, stepping into the familiar smell of motor oil and hot metal, feeling the weight of his father's wrench in his hand. The same wrench that had flown 37 missions, the same wrench that had vibrated against his ribs at 20,000 feet, the same wrench that had reminded him, again and again, where he came from and what he was fighting for. He never flew again. He said the lightning had taken something from him, or given him something, that couldn't be replicated in civilian life. But he kept a photograph on the wall behind the counter, a black and white image of Lightning Lady with her twin engines and her distinctive twin-boom design, and sometimes customers would ask about it, and he'd tell them about the war, about the missions, about the day the Germans captured one of our P-38s and wrote a report saying it was the most formidable fighter they'd ever encountered. Edward kept the wrench polished until the day he died in 1963, maintaining it with the same care he'd given to every tool in his shop. At his funeral, Samuel placed it in his father's hands, and the mortician said later that it took considerable effort to arrange the body because the old man's fingers wouldn't uncurl, as if he were still holding on to something precious. Samuel lived until 1998, 53 years after the war ended. He married, had children, built a successful business, and became known throughout Spokane as the mechanic who could diagnose any engine problem just by listening to the sound it made. But he never talked much about the war, except to say that he'd flown a machine that even the enemy respected, and that respect meant more to him than any victory. The wrench is buried with him. His children offered to keep it, to preserve it as a family heirloom, but Samuel had left specific instructions. "Bury it with me. It came from my father. It flew with me, and it should rest with me." That's where the conversation ends. But the story doesn't end there. Because every machine is a conversation between builder and flyer, and conversations like that echo through generations. Samuel's grandson is an aerospace engineer now, designing next-generation fighters for the Air Force, and he says sometimes, when he's working late in his office, solving problems that seem impossible, he thinks about his grandfather and his great-grandfather, about the workshop in Spokane and the wrench that flew 37 missions, about the Germans who captured a Lightning and couldn't believe what American engineers had built. He thinks about the conversation, the one that began in a small workshop with a father teaching his son to listen to engines, the one that continued at 20,000 feet over Germany with a young pilot flying a machine that seemed to have a soul, the one that echoes now in design labs and wind tunnels and testing facilities where the next generation of engineers is building the next generation of impossibilities. One man's respect for machines sounds simple, almost quaint in our modern age of computers and automation and artificial intelligence. But to Samuel H., it was everything. It was the foundation of his survival, the source of his purpose, the connection between who he was and who he became. And when German pilots flew a captured Lightning and wrote that it possessed astonishing speed and terrifying firepower and engineering sophistication beyond what we have achieved, they were acknowledging something deeper than just technological superiority. They were acknowledging the soul of the machine and the souls of the men who built it and flew it and understood it in ways that transcended mere mechanics. If this letter moved you, if Samuel's story and the craftsmanship of his father deserve to be remembered, subscribe to this channel and leave your like. Every subscription helps us preserve voices like theirs, voices that must never fade into silence. There are thousands more stories untold. Men like Eddie M., who went down over France. Men like Charlie F. and Thomas R., who fell over the Rhine. Men like Major Hartmann, the German ace who flew a captured Lightning and understood, perhaps better than anyone, what it meant. Your support keeps their memory alive. Subscribe, leave your like, share this story. And if you had a veteran in your family, a grandfather, uncle, or neighbor who served, write their name in the comments. Let's honor them together. The wrench that flew 37 missions sits now in the earth of Spokane, buried with the man who carried it through hell and brought it home. But the conversation it represents, the conversation between builder and flyer, between father and son, between what we build and what we become, that conversation continues. It continues in every aircraft that takes to the sky, in every engine that roars to life, in every young engineer who looks at an impossible problem and decides to solve it anyway, because someone somewhere taught them that machines have souls, and that respect for craftsmanship is the foundation of everything. Samuel H. carried his father's wrench through 37 missions. Edward H. polished that wrench until his dying day. And now that wrench rests in the earth, its conversation complete, its purpose fulfilled, its soul finally at peace. But the echo remains. The echo of engines roaring at 20,000 feet. The echo of a German ace's grudging respect. The echo of a father's voice saying, when a machine starts acting up, don't fight it. Work with it. Listen to what it's telling you. The echo of a son's voice responding across the years. I listened, Dad. I listened, and it saved my life. Their hands built history. Their voices keep it alive. Over and out.